Every last one is at base a story about an ordinary American family. A mother, Mary Beth Latham, who tells the story, her husband Glenn, and their 3 kids, Ruby, Alex, and Max. But it's about the kind of cracks in the bedrock of most families. Some of them are small cracks. The siblings aren't getting along. Some of them are big cracks. One of the siblings is having a really serious problem at school, say, or the marriage is not as strong as it should be. And it's about that moment when one of the cracks opens up into a chasm. I've thought a lot in recent years, I guess since September 2001, about our illusions about safety and security, that we can buckle our seatbelts and we can have our mammograms and we can put child-proof caps on our medicines, and we fool ourselves into thinking that we can keep everyone safe. And we forget that life is random and various and sometimes perilous, and that you can keep everyone safe and then something comes out of left field and really blindsides you. This is a book about being blindsided by life. This was a challenging novel in a lot of ways because the thing I did that I've never done before is to write it in the present tense. That might not sound like that big a deal, but the truth is what it means is that your first-person narrator, which in this case is Mary Beth, only knows as much as is happening right now. In other words, if you write a book in the past tense, people are looking back on the events of the book. But because of the kind of book this is and the kind of immediacy I wanted to bring to it, I had to write it in the present tense. And it was kind of an odd challenge for me, and definitely something that I hadn't done before. But I think in terms of the sense of you being there in the book, it winds up working. I think sometimes there's a perception that I write about issues, because in One True Thing, for example, there's the issue of mercy killing or assisted suicide. Black and Blue is self-evident from the title. There is this aspect of domestic violence about it. But the truth is, issues are just things that happen to people in sufficient numbers for us to pay attention. So I really feel like I write books that are very character-driven. The essence of fiction is conflict, and the essence of conflict are problems. And I think that's one of the reasons that I write about some of the things that I do. And I would say as a novelist that actually the most challenging novels to write are challenges where people are happy all the time. That's the kind of novel that I think is challenging. There's a wonderful writer who died some years ago named Laurie Colwin, who once wrote a book called Happy All the Time. And I thought that's a great challenge of Laurie's work, that she writes about people who are basically going about their lives with a variety of very small problems. That doesn't speak to me so much as that moment in life when you are happy, you are contented, things are going well, and then the boom falls. I guess that's what I'm drawn to, the moment when the boom falls. I always wanted to be a novelist. In fact, in my high school prediction, it says, I'm going to write the great American novel. This was before I was familiar with the work of Toni Morrison or Philip Roth, but I was aspirational. But I couldn't quite figure out how you could be a novelist and make a living at it. And I went into the newspaper business originally, pay the rent, except that I'm from a very proper, mannerly Catholic background. And going into a line of work where I went to places where people didn't want me and asked questions they didn't want anyone to ask was the most wonderful, liberating thing on the face of the earth. A Short Guide to a Happy Life proves that I know nothing about publishing or readers. I mean, I wrote a commencement speech for a Catholic university where I was supposed to appear and get an honorary degree. And because of my political views, there was a huge kerfuffle about it, and I stepped down as the commencement speaker. But one of the graduates sent me an email and said, I wanted you to be my commencement speaker, and did you have a speech, and could you send it to me? So I did. And the next thing I knew, in that way that things do on the internet, it was everywhere. And over time, people kept saying, is there any way I can get a hold of a hardcover copy of this? And I kept saying, no, 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 no. And then one day I thought, why am I saying no? And I talked to my editor about it, and Random House decided to do this little book. I remember the Chicago Tribune was quite cruel about it. They did a cover piece in their art section weighing various tiny bestsellers, and mine weighed the least of any book that had ever been a bestseller for a long time. Lots of people win the Pulitzer and it changes their whole lives because they wind up being able to get a series of better and better jobs. But I was an op-ed page columnist at the New York Times at the time. There isn't a better job than that, except being a novelist. So I had these two fantastic jobs, and it didn't change my life much, except that there's a kind of level of validation that you feel. Wow, I am pretty good at this. That's just not like anything else, I think, in that business. I'm not sure how they handle it today, but in 1992, which is when I won for my Times column, they sent you a telegram. But first, Western Union called and read you the telegram at exactly 3 o'clock on Pulitzer Day. And I have to say, the woman who was reading me the telegram got about halfway through and said, "Why, this is wonderful." And I thought, you can say that again. I really feel like we live in a very isolated society. And if there's anything that can break down the barriers between us and among us, it's books. I mean, you read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and you understand what it's like to be female and black. What greater gift could you get? And I really feel like in a democratic society, it's what keeps democracy alive, because reading is the way that you get past the big lies. You know, you hear certain sweeping statements about the president or the Congress or healthcare reform. And if you read enough about those issues, you understand who's trying to con you. So I think reading is transgressive to the extent that it allows us to step out of ourselves and say, nope, that's not true. Or to the extent that it allows us to be bigger than our own experiences. When I'm revising a novel, I can't read literary fiction. I pick up other people's tics, style, whatever. So I only read mysteries. Although I've got to say at this point, there are a whole lot of mysteries that read pretty much like literary fiction. And right now I'm very engaged in the Scandinavians. I've read all the Henning Mankells, of course. I'm reading somebody named Karen Fossum right now. And of course, Stieg Larsson really worked for me the way that his books did for gazillion other readers. And during the summers, I usually reread stuff. I read one major Dickens novel. And then in terms of contemporary writers, there's so many. I mean, Alice McDermott, I think, writes like a dream. Don DeLillo, Philip Roth, where is his Nobel Prize for Literature? I'd like to hand it to him myself. There's just so many wonderful writers out there, and boy, if I couldn't read, I don't know how I'd get through every day. Maybe it's a function of having been a newspaper reporter, but when someone finishes one of my books, I want one of their first reactions to be, this was true. I feel like this was true, like this happened. And I'm always gratified by that reaction from readers. In an odd kind of way, one of the most complimentary questions I get is, what kind of research did you do for this novel? Well, I never do any research for novels. I believe that if you can imagine it, it can happen. So if people finished every last one and said, I feel like this really happened, that would be great for me. That would make me really happy.